Hey, Ben here with Studio on the Lake. So this is number 3 in the watercolor tutorial that's been added to the studio, and just thought I'd mention this part right here would make an awesome, beautiful watercolor painting. Any part of that you can frame and do. So the question is, do I need cheap paint? Can I get away with cheap paint, or do I need expensive paint? And what do I need to paint? So this is the third. I'm not going to go real deep into it, but I just want to show you something I found as we're going along. So obviously first of all, you're going to need the basics. You're going to need some paint. You're going to need something to paint on. So that would be paper. And arches is probably the best, most prevalent you can get out there. And you're going to need some paint brushes. So here's where we run into a problem. I said professional grade paints are better, or at least I like them better because of the effects that they do. But look at that one. That one's $12. It has cadmium in it. This one is a little on the cheaper end. I think that says 727 or 777. That's a really small tube, and I don't remember the ounces on them, but that will go a long way. It doesn't look like it when you pull that up. If you're going to pay some of the paints, you'll pay $20, $25 for. Then you'll need a palette. This palette, people want to know what that little hole in there. That palette was $4. That's a true palette. You stick your thumb through there. You're out plein air, meaning outside. Stop on the street, do a quick sketch, and go down. What colors do you need? Or people are going to ask, what is my palette? Well, if you're going to play around with them, start off with basic colors. Easiest way to do it is learn what you learned in school. Roy G. Biv, the colors of the rainbow. Red, orange, yellow, green, and you notice I put my greens up in the corner, blue, indigo, and violet. And then you can add a gray or a black, and then watercolor purists don't use white, although I use a white gouache in there, or gouache. I can't even say it. I say it twice almost every time, and that's kind of a bastardized, but painting the gouache white on after the fact, the purists will get after you for that, and we'll talk about that more as we get a little deep into it. Hey, I was at the grocery store down here in Iowa, and this was hanging on the rack. It was $1.99, and I was doing the series. It's got a brush. It's for kids, and as a kid, you probably had these. You made a hell of a mess. It says it's washable. And that's probably true, with exception maybe of the red in there. Watercolors in themselves are typically washable, with the exception of the red sometime and a couple of other pigments. In other words, if you wash them enough, they'll come out. They're soluble in water. Even after you're done painting with it, you can lift a color off of the cotton paper with a small amount of staining. So I wet them with a squirt bottle. This is not necessarily a good one. It's just one I had down here that was empty. It was a Windex bottle, so that was free. So you need paints, paper, and brushes. And you notice I'm using paper towels in the background there. And I've got a pencil. You can paint over watercolor pencil, or you can paint over a pencil drawing, and a lot of times the lead will wash out. So that's just a cheap $2 brush. I use it as a mop. These are a set that was probably parts of a set that said watercolor or acrylic. I stayed away from the oil. Oil tends to be bigger. There's that cheap brush that came with the $1.99 set. There's my favorite little liner brush, they call that. So get yourself probably $10, $12, $15. You can pick up a set that says watercolor. Arches paper is the best. We won't go into that this time, but I'll do a whole series on paper, but I tend to use 140-pound arches, and I forget what these cost. This pad's probably $30, $20 or $30, and it'll have, I forget, 20 sheets maybe, 12 sheets, but you'll notice this one's too big. It's what I brought down, and you see that's even a bigger one. So that's one I've started a while back. It's a landscape. And it is done with the professional paints. It's done with a little bit of masking, which will go in there. And it's not finished. I've done the northern portion. And this happened to be on the back. I used both sides of a mat board to put my paper down. And that was a cat that I'm working on, or started working on and gave up. So I use a piece of cardboard or foam board. You see this paper is really big. You need to tape it down, and we can later on go into watercolor paper prep. People and purists get into it crazy. This was too big, So I always have an X-Acto knife in my kit there, and I cut this down to the size that I want it, because a lot of times I don't want to paint a huge painting. I just want to do a small painting. If you were going to do watercolor cards, you'd make a card size 5x7, whatever the heck it is, ×2 wide. Tape off half of it, fold it in half when you're done. And as you saw in one of the other ones, I went ahead and bought paper. But you need to tape it down, because the water has a tendency to soak into the cotton paper and it starts to bow and do magical things. So I'm going to paint with this cheap set, and it was kind of fun. So how do you figure out how to start painting what you're going to do? Well, first of all, you're not going to paint straight out of that palette on the left there. Now, the palette I built with those tubes, you can actually buy a professional palette that's been already built, and you can reload it. So what I've done here is I've taken 8 of the colors, and I'm going to put 8 down one side, and this is called a study sheet. And what you're going to do is you're going to set this up, and then you're going to paint your colors down, and it's going to give you an idea of mixing. Okay. So it's a color chart, and on the left side of this going down, and then on the top side the same colors will go across, and then I'll paint each of them as it'll make sense as we go down. So I'm using kind of a medium mixture. With watercolor you can go heavy pigment, meaning less water, and what I just did right there, I could stick that brush back in the water and get a really diluted red color, and I could paint with that slightly diluted water. And that's kind of the neat thing about watercolor, and that gives you a hue without getting too deep into the technical terms here. The way that I set that up across there, and I should have actually went up one because I missed the first color there. We didn't get that orange or whatever the heck that is up in the top there, except in the end there. So I'm going to paint all these across, and I did it backwards from what a lot of people do. They do it the other way. And then I'm going to come back, and I'm painting all this at 2 or 3 times the speed, because you don't need to see me paint these. But I'm going to use the same color across, left to right, and then I'm going to do the only pure ones are on the left-hand side and the upper right-hand side. As you go in, I've taken the top one, added it to the one below it. So, and here's an example of that. So I'm painting red down, that second color red on the top line, over the blue. That would tell me what that mix looks like. I'm painting it over the green, and as you could imagine, in the color wheel, it's going to give me a brown. Now this next one, I'm betting it's going to give me a muddy, kind of an orange. So this is color theory in practice, sort of. You don't need to know about color theory to make this work. You can look at one of these swatches and decide if you want to use this. When I'm painting a big, something that I'm really intent on painting and not screwing around, I'll have a piece of blank or scrap paper off on the right side, this watercolor paper, and I will do my mixes, and then I will test it out on the paper before I put it on the painting. Now keep in mind, watercolor dries lighter than it goes on. So it'll go on and look fairly dark, and it will dry substantially lighter. And by muddy, when you're messing around with the color wheel, you've got your primary colors, your 3, and then you've got your secondary colors, and we won't go into that are made by mixing the 3 primary colors. And then you've got a group of 6 or 9, depending on who you listen to in the middle, where you get even worse and bastardize the rest of it. So I built that chart. I could reference that chart to see how I want to mix. Now I'm not going to mix in the actual paint tray, but see the left-hand side of that tray's got an open lid. I would mix those in there, or I'd mix them on a saucer, and I'd wash my brush carefully between so I don't pollute the colors. But this was a $1.99 set, which is amazing considering Tubes of paint are between $7 and $20. And if you got 8 of them, you can see where you can get into $100, $200 for paint easily. Oftentimes when I go to the paint store, if I'm buying watercolor specific, it's really hard pressed to walk away with less than $100. When I reorder my oil paints, which don't go nearly as far as the watercolor, and they're in huge tubes, it's not unreasonable for me to get into $200 or $300 worth of paint. So this is not cheap, but the question here was, can I get away with this cheap set? And we're going to answer that towards the end. As soon as I'm done with this, I'm going to paint a crappy little landscape lake scene. And what's interesting is these stuff I did on the right were the two colors that I didn't put the grays in there, and I didn't put the browns that were on the ends there. And ironically enough, when I did the wash over these are about the only colors, plus a few in the middle, and I'll show you that at the end, that I would actually use to paint with. And the reason for that is that that's a kid set, obviously designed as a kid set, and it turned out to be almost neon, and you'll see that in this painting. So I've taped down the other half of the paper. I went on a 1/3 rule. So if you're going up the paper, you want to center your subject area, and then your horizon line typically is on the 1/3 if you're highlighting the on the bottom 1/3 if you're highlighting the upper portion of it, the painting, and on the upper 1/3 if you're doing a landscape. And this is not a hard, fast rule, but you saw I did a little bit of a water wash, and I'm just kind of scribbling in this blue. And you can see it's kind of neon. I have set it up sort of so the paint's on the left, that's paint, and then upper right is a water glass or bottle. And you can get some fancy water bottles. You can drive yourself insane trying to figure out this. So now I took a little bit of indigo, and I'm letting it bleed in. I still got water, it's wet. I am working flat. Typically when I'm at home, the drafting board that I paint on has a 20 or 30 degree tilt to it. And a lot of watercolor techniques. You see the upper left-hand corner, how that's bleeding down? Come on, focus. There we go. And I even held that up to get it to start to run down a little bit. See how it's bleeding down and giving me kind of a cloud effect in there? And I left some white in there. Now, this is not going to be a very good lesson on painting a watercolor scene. But keep in mind, these are $1.99 paints. I'm using brushes. So the next thing I want to put in is a little bit of land sticking out in the middle, as if this were a lake or a river. So I want to leave a spot in the middle. Now, one thing I forgot to do on this, and when I was planning it out, I thought later on that I wanted a sun in there. I should have put that in before I put the blue in, and we'll see why. So I used a couple different tints. Got some browns in there, and I'm working that wet. You can see the sky is kind of running down in, so I'm going to put in a background quick wash with some green. Notice how that's starting to mix and turn brown. Now I went to a blue over on this side, and you can see I put a little dash of blue in there. And later on, like I said, the sun's going to crack between those two outcroppings of land where the water goes away from the other side. So I'm running a line down here, and that's not wet down there, so it tends to hold on the bottom. And you notice what happened when I put that land in there. We'll sneak a few lessons in here. It pushed the sky back. Now that looks like it's further in the background, and as we move forward, I'll show you something to push those even further back. So far I was kind of liking this actually at this point. And it was only after I finished it that I realized how neon it was. So I'm getting ready to put in the water. I'm being careful. I'm doing a very light wash. I want this to be lighter than the sky. Again, you would test these colors out on your palette there. And this is that $1.99 set. Now I'm using the big brush. And look at the color difference. So I've just got a hint of water in that. Now another thing that is not showing right now, but will show later on if you're doing a watercolor or landscape, the items in the foreground have, in other words, closest to you, have more detail than the items in the background. As a result of that detail, they're clearer, and they're not as, you see how I got a little bit darker? They're going to be darker and clearer. In other words, you would see more of a water effect in the front, whereas in the background, on the water in the lake, you just see a mist. The sky would have a mist, and those islands would just have, or those outcroppings would have not as much or clarity of detail. So you see this, a lot of people will do this, and those have dried a little bit too much. But if you think about it, the reflection is going to be off of that island down into the water, and it should be the mirror image. If you were to put you take it and flip that over upside down, it should be bleeding towards the direction of you in the water. You can kind of see that happening to some degree there. I'm going to go back and try to put some trees in here, and I didn't reload the brush. I started with the dark green on that side. Now, you saw me reach in there and dab off with a paper towel. I didn't like the conglomeration of paint in there, so I took some of that off. And then, ironically, I put it back. I didn't like it, made it darker. So now, I'm putting in the dark values, which would, if you look at an island on the corner there, a lot of it's going to be in shadow under the trees, between the trees, and that sort of stuff, with smats of color. And this is the beauty of watercolor. This is kind of a fun painting. You could do this particular painting with a little bit of your style in it and play with all the rules. They're in there. So I came back and I threw some trees in there, and this is a point where they're starting to look awful neon to me. You can do this same thing with basically 3 colors of browns and brown tones or sepia tones, and it looks pretty cool. A lot of artists only paint with a limited palette, 5 or 6 colors. I tend to add a few more in. So now I put some yellow on the brush, and I'm putting some yellow highlights in. You could put some brown highlights in. You could put in a couple of blues in there. Whatever trips your trigger. And this is the fun of playing around with it. You can start to see, if you got an imagination, this is starting to look kind of like 2 islands in the background. Now, keep in mind, since I painted those on there, I need to have, to make it look realistic, I need to have the same colors in the water, and they should be light, like a reflection, and then they should waver back and forth, left and right. Does that make sense? Because the waves are going to be moving them. It's not going to be, if you go back and look at the intro, where I said this would be a great watercolor painting, you can see that the water moving back and forth is giving that a shimmer. So I put the green in the corner, I put a little brown in the middle. Now I got too much green, but you can see I've got there's the shadow of the trees in the lake, in theory. Now, I took the back of the brush, and this didn't work out with the pigment on this. It was a little bit tacky, and I overdid it. But I put tree limbs in there, just with the back of the brush. And by doing that, I made that, and you can see I'm trying to draw the edge of that landmass in there. When you use the back of the brush, you're scratching, kind of a scratching technique, and it pushes down on the cotton fibers, and then the darker colors will fill in. You can see how that just kind of almost made a tree. Now, here's where I got stupid. I thought that was probably dry up there, and I thought, man, I wish I'd have left that blue and put a sun up there, because this is a perfect opportunity for the sun to be coming down on the lake. But guess what happens when you add yellow to blue? It turns green. So I'm trying my best here to make that yellow, and it's got a green to it. Now you see, I've turned the palette around, and I started putting washes in the empty tray. You do the same thing with your palette, because I wanted a really light yellow. So I'm mixing it down there. If I'm going to mix a color, I'm going to mix it in the little clear compartment on that, because I don't want to muddy up the original color. Otherwise, I've just changed the context of that color. So this is a little bright, and you saw me scratch through there to give it a left and a right. This is really tricky. If you're doing this part for real, you want the blues, and you want stuff to stick in front of that. So see how I'm kind of pushing that back a little bit with the island there? So everything you paint as it comes toward you is going to push the stuff in the upper part of the paint to the back. Now here's the tricky part, and I wouldn't recommend this. I would have left some portions of the yellow across the lake there, because when I put this blue against the yellow, and the yellow is still wet, it's going to turn green and ruin your effect. Now, remember what I said earlier about as it comes closer to you, you want to go darker. And I grabbed that cheap brush that came with the $1.90 thing. See those little black squirrels on the left-hand side? Those are the hairs of the brush falling out. And I'm using it as a wash brush because it's a big kind of a mop brush. And I'm not getting too crazy with the color. Now I've got my liner brush, and I'm going to put in some green, like cattails and reeds, and I'm doing it really quick because at this point I had noticed that the painting was really neon looking, and the intent of it was just to show you what we can get away with here. Now, had I used the professional paints and picked a palette that was a little bit tamer, I would have taken a little more time finishing the front of this up. But at this point I can see there's no real value to this painting other than showing you what you can do. There's a mistake right there, there's another mistake right there, and that one's probably not. So notice I put 4 in there. A lot of times odd divisions work better. So 4 of them seems to be too much, 2 of them is too little, 3 would be just right on those cattails. And I'm switching between yellows, and at that point there I was putting some leaf looking things in there. Look how fluorescent that thing looks. It's kind of amazing. This palette might be worth playing around with, but you're not going to get a professional color or watercolor. You're going to get kind of a neon looking thing going on. And if you think about it, that $1.99 set was in the grocery store to entertain kids and let kids play around. And kids like bright, vibrant colors. I like bright, vibrant colors if I'm doing Christmas cards. If I'm doing landscapes or other paintings, with the exception of maybe some cats sometime, I tend to stick with more muted colors. But this whole exercise was to show you what you need. Now, the better the paint, the higher the quality of the paint, the happier you're going to be. You can start off with a student grade. It has less pigment. You can work with an artist grade, and you can work with a professional grade. I like to work with the professional grades because if I'm going to take the time and effort to build it, I want it to act better and have the right color. So the professional grades tend to have a better pigment, better color mixing. They're higher quality across the board, and they'll make up a little bit for technique. But if you have an impeccable technique and you paint with a student grade, you can come up with some fantastic artwork. But wouldn't it be nicer if you had the real deal going? So here's the neon, and here's what I'm trying to show you now. Now that is pretty vibrant. The one that I'm doing on the right there has some pretty vibrant colors in it because that's what I was going for. But see the difference between the muted colors in the lower right, the greens, the oranges, and the whatnots, and then you got this bright neon thing. So verdict is in. I wouldn't paint with the $2 one. If I did, I would try to get one that had some more neutral colors. You need to build your own palette, and unfortunately that's going to cost you some money. So hey, thanks a lot. This is end of lesson 3. This has been Ben with Student on the Lake.